Hey guys, it's the Duke, and in this week's video we're going to be talking about Hardspace Shipbreaker, a game where you take apart ships carrying explosive fuel with lasers. And sometimes bad things happen. But before we get into that, let's talk about the rest of the game. In Hardspace Shipbreaker, you work for a mega corporation called Lynx. Your job with Lynx is to take apart spaceships for cash and salvaging and whatever it is Lynx does with the rest of the ship. Now I know that sounds awfully blue collar. Normally games that involve blue collar work are not really for me. I'm talking about games like Farming Simulator, but if you put that game in space, I'll give it a try. And sure enough, this game has been great. The best term I can think of it is cracked out on this game, and ever since I first started playing it back in February, I've gone through spurts where I only played it for an entire week, and I got in an embarrassing amount of hours so that way I could play the game and unlock new ships and new tools and all of that. The game checks a lot of boxes for me. It has a progression system where you can upgrade your tools. There's a min-maxing element to it. When I first started playing the game, I wasn't super efficient in the way I took apart ships, but over time, I became a lot more efficient and I was able to get more done in my 15-minute shift allotment time. There are a lot of things about the game that I do like, and there are multiple things that I do take issue with, so we'll start with the things that I do like about the game. Whether it's intentional or not, I like the commentary the game makes about the corporate hellscape, as it were. There have been a number of games recently that highlight the topic of corporations that become too big and control too much of our lives. I'm talking about games like The Outer Worlds, Journey to the Savage Planet, Industries of Titan. So because there's a shared lineage between this game and those other games that I mentioned, you'll see some similar tropes between all of these games. For example, when you first start the game out, as in your first shift with Lynx, you are handed a bill from Lynx, which I assume involves the future training that they're going to have to do with you and other administrative fees and things like that, just for getting you into the program to help them make money off of you. You're handed a bill for $1.2 billion, which is a lot because on average, you only get anywhere from $3 to about $8 million from each ship that you take apart, so you're going to be taking apart a lot of ships over time. I assume that as the game grows and expands, because the game is in early access, that is, that you are going to start to get ships that are more valuable to help you whittle down that number. Another thing too that I think really adds to the topic of the corporate hellscape, as it were, is that you consistently feel like your tools are just on the verge of breaking apart entirely. For example, your laser cutter, it has a tendency to break. It could break a little bit during the middle of a shift, and it won't be as efficient or be able to disperse as much heat as it builds it up. Now, I think the intent behind that was to make you feel like Lynx gave you the very cheapest version of the tools that they could find, so that way you could at least do your job. I bet in this universe there are better versions of these tools, but Lynx gave you the cheapest one because, hey, they want to make as much money as possible and they can't be giving you premium tools to do it. If you can get the job done with the cheapest thing, why not? And another thing too is that you consistently feel like the game doesn't teach you enough. This is both a good and a bad thing. It's bad because there may be times where you are completely surprised that something happened because you weren't trained or told about it. It's also good though because the game encourages experimentation. It wants you to make mistakes. It wants you to learn the hard way. It wants you to learn over time by doing it. But I feel like that theme further lends to the whole corporate kind of culture thing where they don't train you enough, but yet they still expect you to be able to do the job. And then, of course, there's that whole thing about feeling unfairly compensated for this. The fact that you start off $1.2 billion in debt and everything you're doing is to make money for them. I feel like that further adds to the whole theme of corporations gone rampant. Now, in the game itself, your gameplay loop is this. In the primary story-based version of the game, you have a 15-minute shift to disassemble as much of the ship as you can. Now you can do multiple 15-minute shifts on the same ship if you'd like, or you can just go in, salvage the most valuable things, and then move on to the next ship. It's up to you. But because of that 15 minutes, you need to be very efficient with your use of time. So that's going to be planning, eventually, learning how to take apart the layout of the ship in the most efficient way possible. That means you also need to manage certain other things such as your oxygen, your jetpack fuel, and your supplies like demo charges and tethers. So when thinking about all of those things, you do occasionally need to run back to your hab, as they call it, to be able to replenish your stocks on these things. If you don't get enough oxygen, of course, you will die. And if you run out of fuel, it's going to be very hard for you to get back to the hab or move around the ship in general. So all of these things take time, and you need to think about how you're going to use your time efficiently. Because of that 15-minute time limit, it's also led to more than a few instances of me just being careless. Maybe it's arrogance because I know how to play this game and I know how these ships work, but even 60 or so hours in the game, I still make really basic mistakes in the interest of trying to do this as efficiently as possible. For example, here, I use my laser cutter to cut a cut point. Instead of using the more focused version, I used the sweeping line, and then this happened. Now that's pretty epic, not gonna lie, that's pretty cool, but it also ruined the ship, and now I won't be able to salvage it for anywhere near its full value. But I will say, when things go wrong, they go wrong spectacularly. I mean, look at all this damage that happened to the ship, and what's really impressive about this game is all of the different particle effects, how the engine actually renders all of these different millions of little pieces of the ship that exist after that massive explosion, and I can still salvage all of that. It's just not going to be as valuable now. It's actually kind of cool to watch some of these things happen, but sometimes it can just be really frustrating, especially when it's very unintentional, as you'll see in some of the other footage here. Now, in the most recent content update that happened in May of 2021, they did add Act 1 of the story. I don't know how many acts there are, so it's hard to tell how much of the game that is. But there isn't much of a story yet. As you go on, you start to find ships that have these alien devices on them that they don't like to be removed from the ship, and they'll actively do things to try and kill you. I imagine that the future acts of the story are going to have to do with these alien devices, but it's unclear as of now. So there isn't much of a story yet. Now, for everything that I like about this game, there are a couple things that I don't like or I find to be inconsistent. The first thing I think has to do with depressurization. Depressurization of a ship is a very vital thing to do, as you won't be able to take apart a ship until it's depressurized, and you need to be wary of the dangers of violent depressurization. So how depressurization works is you have these atmospheric regulators that suck the air out of the cabin. Sometimes in certain rooms, the atmospheric regulators may be broken or non-functional, so you would think that logically, if you make the entire ship one giant cabin, that you might be able to just use a single depressurization station to depressurize the whole ship. But that doesn't work the way you think it would, and it will cause violent depressurization somewhere in the ship, and that leads to all kinds of bad things happening. From what I understand, that's a limitation of the game engine itself, in that like each room is treated as a compartment. Even if you open the doors or the windows or whatever between the compartments, that's still going to happen. So knowing that, and again, I'm not sure if that's how it's supposed to work in real life, no clue there, but knowing that, it does present a challenge in how you're going to depressurize a ship. As in, sometimes there isn't an easy way to do it, and you just have to do it the hard way, and bad things are going to happen. So it's all about like minimizing those bad things as much as possible. Luckily, I found ways on the much larger ships to depressurize the entire ship without causing a massive explosion. And other weird things too are that objects are strangely fragile at times, inconsistently fragile too. For example, anything that has to do with coolant, you need to be extremely careful of. You can pick up a computer terminal, and for what seems like no reason at all, it may shoot out a spark, and then that spark ignites something, or it damages coolant, which causes a massive problem because the coolant actually makes everything around it more brittle and more subject to just shattering, thus losing its value. Here's another clip too where I pull a power core out, and for what seems like no reason at all, a spark shoots out and destroys a good chunk of the ship. So there are some of those inconsistencies throughout the game, but you sort of learn to work around them or plan for the best. And it's not all doom and gloom. If something does get destroyed, everything is still salvageable. It just won't be as valuable. Another thing too is that the progression in this game is amazingly slow. And I say amazing because you can be playing this game for 10 hours at a time in one session and feel like you haven't progressed or unlocked any new equipment. I don't know if progression is always going to be slow as they change and modify the game, but as it is right now, you're going to have to put in a lot of time to unlock the bigger ships. The bigger ships give you more credits to be able to upgrade your equipment, but it takes a long time to get there. You're going to salvage the same ship over and over and over again because that's the only ship you have available at the time. Other weird things too are sometimes the key bindings are just a little finicky. In particular, the ability to push an object and interact with an object are actually mapped to the same key by default. So there have been a number of times where I pushed away something I actually needed to pick up, like a data drive, or I pushed away a coolant tank that I needed to pick up, and then it caused it to explode and kill me, as you can see here. But of course, all of that is remappable, so that's really on me for just not changing it, but I still felt it was an interesting design choice. There are also occasionally buggy ship objects and interactions between ship objects. In this clip here, you can see that I've cut through a piece of the hull to separate the two pieces of hull from each other to make it easier to move around. But even though it doesn't appear there is anything here, they're still not separated. Things like this are bound to happen, especially when the game engine is having to account for all of these different objects and the interactions between objects, but it is something to still be aware of, that sometimes it just doesn't work the way you think it's going to. Overall though, I really like this game. I've put 60 plus hours into it over 2 or 3 separate week periods over the last few months. Even though there isn't much to do beyond what I've already done in the game, I still find it fascinating. There's something just so relaxing and somewhat zen about taking apart a ship. I can't really explain it or how that might even be fun, but to me it's just something that I find to be super relaxing until something goes wrong. Anyway, if you're interested in checking out Hardspace Shipbreaker, it is available on Steam. Again, it's in early access, so just be aware of that there are a lot of things that are changing. In preparation for this May content patch, they actually did a progression reset, so everyone had to start over. If that's kind of a turnoff to you, I can completely understand that, but I'd say follow the game's developments and maybe check in at a later date. Anyway guys, I hope you liked this video. You know what to do: like, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you next time.